There we go. All right. Thank you.
Now, one more thing.
All right. I was getting some technical help, which I certainly need. Uh, and there goes my video again. Okay, so we're talking here again about uh, life after the scandal. See if we can get my video back on here, but regardless, I'm going to talk to what we're doing. One of the things that we talked about punishing people those who've broken the law, of course, that's very important, and I mentioned that before. We want to make accounting records more transparent, and I have to tell you that I think in some cases, accounting records are transparent. What I think happens in many cases is that people don't understand how to read them. So I would say let's not so much make them. Well, that's very good. Thank you. Let's not so much make them more transparent as let's make them more understandable. For instance, there's a common after an audit is done or something of that nature, is the common statement that said that things have been done according to the generally accepted accounting principles. Well, there's nothing wrong with that statement, but if you don't understand what the general accepted accounting principles are, you really have to be concerned about whether the statements you have there is meaningful. And then the last thing we want to talk about is, this is very important. It's very important for you to internalize the statement. Consider what is as ethical. Consider the morality of your decision, not just what is legal. You can be legal and not be ethical. Now, let me give you the perfect example of being legal and not being ethical. Before the Civil War in the United States, it started in the United States in actually, some of it started before Lincoln was inaugurated, late 1860. The question was, or the question is, was slavery legal? And the answer to that question was and is yes, it was legal. It was in the law. The Supreme Court, as a matter of fact, rendered a decision in 1857 that talked about a particular slave, Dred Scott, who had escaped, that he had no legal standing. He wasn't, more or less, was not a human being. Okay, so now we know it was legal. Was it ethical? Was it moral? Should one human being take another human being and subjugate that person to do his or her bidding? And the answer to that question is no. So we had a legal parameter in the United States that said slavery was legal, but it certainly was not ethical. So can never consider that as being ethical. Well, here's the cost of corruption. This is an illegal briefcase to various and sundry miscreants. Bernie Madoff, he was sentenced to 150 years in prison. Of course, he won't serve 150 years. Jeffrey Skilling, who was the president and chief executive officer at Enron when it imploded in 2001, says they're serving a 24-year prison sentence. I understand that his sentence was reduced. And then Richard Cossey, who was guilty of accounting fraud. There were other people down there. Andrew Fastow was another one, of course. Kenneth Lay, who was the former CEO, but was then chairman of the board, died of a heart attack before he could go to trial. And in fact, if you go to Texas and ask that that law be opened get the file on Kenneth Lay, you'll find out that he was considered to be innocent because he was never brought to trial. WorldCom founder Bernie Ebbers serving 25 years in prison, and of course there are others. So that's the cost to the individual of corruption. The cost to those folks who invested with these people, such as Enron. I'll give you a story about Enron. There was a gentleman who was an Enron employee. Of course, it was something else before it was Enron, Texas Pipeline Distributing Company, something like that. The name escapes me. Anyway, he worked long enough for the company to retire. His retirement portfolio was about $1.3 million. The day after Enron went belly up, his portfolio was worth $13,000. A Ponzi scheme is exactly what it says. What you have to have is a broad base of investors at the bottom. It's like a pyramid. And so what happens, you get enough people at the bottom paying in, and then you're paying off to people as it rises to the top. So there's actually no investment going on here. There's no money being made from investments. Money's being made from new people who are coming in and are paying. And if they're in long enough and enough extra investors get in at the bottom, they may eventually start getting some money back. But money is based on the number of investors. It's never based on if we're able to actually make money. All right, here the question we're asked here is, what is ethics? Notice that ethics are the standards of moral behavior that are accepted by the public, and it says society here, as being right or wrong. There's some basic moral values on the right side about right. This is on the left side of your screen: integrity, respect for human life, self-control, honesty, etc. And on the opposite side, on the right side, I wish these were actually reversed here, cheating, cowardice, and cruelty. There's other ones that go in there, but those are ones that certainly jump out at you. I like this slide very much. You can find it in the text. And the kid here says, I don't know what plagiarizing is, so I'm just going to go the easy way out and copy something off the internet. That's plagiarism. You cannot take your work, cannot take work from someone else and stick it into something that you're writing, you're handing in and palm that off as your own work. It simply is not your work, and it won't serve any purpose other than you'll be found out, and you'll go from there. Notice that there's a strong relationship between academic dishonesty and dishonesty at work. This is a making ethical decisions scenario that's in your text. I suggest that you read it. This is not an assignment, but it is good for you to do that. And then look at the ethical questions. And one of the questions that asks, is it ethical to create a fake account? Well, there's another ethical question there too, and that comes in, is it ethical for you to post something that's untrue about someone else? Because Facebook or some other type of social media gives you anonymity. Well, the answer certainly is no. Now, these are the three questions. By the way, if you take another course with me later on in your academic career called Organizational Behavior and Culture, you'll find out that there's some more questions that are asked, but we're not in that course, and we're going to use these three questions here. The first question you ask yourself is it legal? In other words, does it conform with the canons of law? We go back to the slavery question. Was slavery in the United States legal before the Civil War, before President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the United States Constitution? The answer is yes, it was. The next question you have to ask, we're keeping in this vein, the slavery business, We're not talking about business right now, but I think this is a good way to frame it in your mind. Is it balanced? Well, the answer to that question is no, it wasn't balanced because one person had all the power over another person or many other persons. People weren't paid, they were not well housed, they were not well fed, some other things. The old propaganda that you see of the slaves happily singing on the plantations is a bunch of tommy rot. And I'm not going to back off of that statement either. It's just something that should never have been done. And then the last question you need to ask yourself is, I make this decision, how will I feel about myself? And let's take this a couple places, a couple other steps. How will my friends and family feel about us? And then the next part of that question is, how will I feel about this decision if it's broadcast on the 11 o'clock news, broadcast and telecast on 11 o'clock news? You know, if you can answer all those questions that yes, that this is okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you're probably in pretty good shape. If you can't answer those questions in the affirmative, you need to relook the decision. So what we're saying here, and the text does not quite put it the way I'm going to, but in every decision that you make, you need to consider the ethical consequences. And just because it might be the greatest good for someone doesn't mean it's the greatest good for everyone. This shows a question here of bribery's bad boys. This is a source from Ford magazine, excuse me, is the source. This goes back to 2010. So what you see here may no longer be true. In other words, these particular incidents may have been settled. There may have been some judicial case gone on and been satisfied, etc. But these are big amounts of money. And the smallest amount of money is $106 million. And we're talking about a lot of stuff. And look at bribery issues on different continents. Bribe Nigerian officials. Nigeria happens to be a very corrupt country. I'm sorry to have to say that. But this is a way of doing business. This bribery is a way of doing business in some parts of the world. And yet the United States Congress has passed laws and told American businesses that if you're going to do business overseas, you have to abide by the American law. And if the American law says what you're doing is illegal, then you cannot do it. And yet we find people who continually pay no attention to that law and try to go on and do things as they have done in the past. Progress assessment, I'll let you look at that for a second. We're going to move on to that. The first thing here it says is that I think that we need to think about, and I'm going to talk a good deal about this. It says that ethics, organizational ethics, business ethics, begins in the corner offices. Now that's my term. Usually you find that the corporate folks, the senior executives and the CEO, pardon me, him or herself, have an office in the corner of the building. Where they have, they can say things and they can see things, and makes it nice atmosphere, etc. So if the folks at the top are setting ethical practices, and they're putting them into policies and procedures in the organization, but they don't follow them, we can't expect anybody else in the organization to follow them either. I have a textbook, well, it's not a standard textbook, a book that I had when I was in postgraduate school, and it was called Moral Mazes. It's a world corporate of ethics in the corporate world. And what a senior manager said in that text, I'm quoting, I don't have it verbatim. He says, what is wanted from you and the corporation is your ethics in the corporation are not the same as your ethics at home or your ethics at church. What it is what the person above you wants. And so that is kind of a damning thought process. And what that simply means is if the guy or gal above you is not ethically correct, then you're gonna be in a lot of trouble because you're going to be pushed and pulled. And what will happen is when we see people shaving on their expense accounts and things like that, and it's accepted that that's going to permeate to the company. So it is the managers, it's the senior executives and down to the middle managers, et cetera, to make sure that this ethical code is put in place when the corporation actually takes hold. And notice that the last bullet talks about there has to be trust developed between the worker and his or her manager, supervisors, and it has to be based on openness. It has to be based on honesty. It has to be based on fairness, as well as moral integrity. These are factors influencing managerial ethics. We have the individual, we have the organization, and we have the environment. All of those causing some type of pressure on you, and then individual values and family status and work background, etc. Organizational, among other things, the firm's reward system. Now, here are two types of ethical codes that you will find most places. We have compliance-based code and we have an integrity-based code. The compliance-based code is based on the law, and it also emphasizes preventing unlawful behavior, as you notice here on the slide, by increasing controls and then penalizing wrongdoers. But it does not say what we are about, which is the integrity-based code. Notice it talks about defining the organization's values, creating an environment that supports ethically sound decision-making, shared accountability. Now, one of my favorite stories about this is about Mars Candy. You certainly know Mars Candy, M&M's, Snickers, Milky Way, and a few others. This goes back a story. Well, I first became acquainted with the story when I was in graduate school in the late 1980s. So the story probably goes to sometime in the mid 1980s. And a cocoa bean buyer from Mars came upon a broker in Central or South America. I'm not sure exactly the locale, but well south of the United States border, and found out he was in distressed economic condition. And so he cut a deal with this guy for less than the going rate. And he got back to the home office and thought that he would be patted on the back. Instead, Mars actually admonished him. I couldn't get the word out there for a second. Admonished him. Went back to the cocoa bean broker, tore up the contract, and said, we want the contract rewritten at the normal price. Now, one of the things that Mars, and it's one of its five operating principles, was what they called reciprocity. And they simply said, we want to be treated correctly, and we expect other people to be treated correctly. And what Mars said was, in this particular case, this guy was down in his luck. Wasn't any sense to take advantage of him because that might happen to Mars sometime, and they would want the same type of behavior given to them. So an ethical code, the integrity code, the code that is based upon integrity based, it is actually saying we are at a higher standing. We don't just follow the law. We just don't punish wrongdoers. This is our standard. This is what we expect everybody to do. This is based on our values. This is how we operate. And of course, yes, people have to be punished. They have to know what the punishment for their transgression is. But it starts at the top, and everybody has to live that code. That code should be given to every new employee once he or she walks in the door, and for the first day of work. There's an orientation talks about that an ethical training should be conducted on a periodic basis throughout the year. Employees need to understand that senior management expects all employees to act ethically, and of course that goes for senior management. And then making a point that I made some time ago, pardon me, and that is that ethics has to be part of the consideration in every decision that's made. There should be an ethics. I want to go back a second. Okay, right. Ethics office within every corporation. People ought to be able to know that they can make complaints anonymously. And we do have those folks known as whistleblowers. Now, one of the problems we have with whistleblowers is not the whistleblower himself or herself. What we find is once those people become whistleblowers and they become known, they tend to be shunned, and people don't have anything to do with them. Instead of thinking that these folks are actually doing a favor, they're actually turned out to be pariahs. And we don't want to have anything to do with it. We want to get away from it. We don't need these people around here. People ought to be, we ought to bring outsiders in sort of as an external audit. Now, actually, that's what the board of directors ought to be doing. The board of directors ought to be an independent voice. Unfortunately, it's not, because the companies appoint people to their boards, and the board members are paid for attending meetings and maybe for doing some other type things within their contract. But they do have a fiduciary responsibility. And most of our, by the way, that's set by law. It's not set by something that the person talking to you said. That's set by law. And those laws usually are state laws as well as federal laws. Most of the problems that we have in unethical practices in business usually revolves around money, either not doing things to save money, which would be unethical practices, or doing something else which is going to get the company more money. And then finally, it says here that the ethics code has to be enforced. And yes, that's absolutely correct. If you don't enforce the ethical code, then you're not going to have what you need to have. Go back up here just a second. So how do we prevent ethical lapses? Well, I would tell you that for the most part, we prevent ethical lapses, as I mentioned at the very beginning of this, starting from the top. This talks about managers communicating expected ethical behavior at the vision of the organization, and I don't disagree with that. What I am just trying to reinforce is that the ethics starts with senior leadership. Without senior leadership walking the talk as well as talking the walk, it's not going to happen. An organization should have a code of ethics. There should have to be policies in place to enforce that. People have to know what's going to happen to them if they transgress the ethical code. And then everybody has to have ethical training. And as I mentioned, it should be on a periodic basis. Again, ethical decisions, ethics consideration, or consideration of ethical implications of every decision should be part of the decision-making process. organizations have to act as quickly as possible when an ethical crisis occurs. And then employees must know they have to defend and maintain the company's reputation. Back in the 1980s, in Chicago, there was an outbreak of poison, people being poisoned, and eventually some of them dying. I think the number was 11, but don't hold me to that, from ingesting Tylenol that had been poisoned. And fairly quickly, it became evident that the poisoning was happening after the Tylenol had been shipped to the retailer. Johnson & Johnson, who was the maker of Tylenol, took immediate action, pulled all the Tylenol back, and told the public. The president and CEO went on television and said, "We will not sell Tylenol again until we can assure that the Tylenol is safe." That was the beginning of tamper-proof cap and a few other things. Okay, an progress assessment for you. Next, we're going to talk about corporate social responsibility. This, again, is based upon things we talked about before, openness, fairness, integrity, respect, etc. But this goes beyond what happens inside the company, internal. This is to the outside. It's to the people that we interact with outside. It's the community. It's the environment. It's a few other things. And one of the things corporate social responsibility says is that this is what the corporation intends to give back to society. Once it does that, it can have a greater claim on resources. But normally speaking here, it's not so much to get a greater claim on resources, but it's to show that it's a good corporate citizen. And notice the slide here, what it says is that corporate social responsibility proponents say it is society to which a corporation owes its existence. Now let's think about this. If people in society are not buying a company's products, how long is it going to stay in business? The answer to that's not very long. And so that is the thought process that companies have to ingest. They have to internalize that. They have to understand that. This talks about corporate philanthropy and social initiatives. Philanthropy includes charitable donations, and then corporate social initiatives include enhanced forms of social philanthropy. Corporate responsibility includes everything. Hiring minorities. Of course, we know that that's been an initiative in the United States for over 50 years, and it needs something that needs to continue. Having safe working environments. We've had the OSHA regulations since 1970s. People complain about that. They think it's government intrusion, but let's face facts. If you can reduce the number of accidents in your plant, it just makes sense. You're not having to pay increased premiums for workers' compensation. You're going to have more production, and you're going to have people that feel better, work better, etc. Other things to reduce the environmental footprint. That means being conscious of pollution, using energy wisely. We have to think about this. When we come to talking about energy, most of the energy that we use in this country is finite. That means it comes from a source that we're not going to have forever. Coal for electricity, or natural gas for electricity, natural gas for heat, petroleum for oil and gasoline, etc. We're not going to get those back. We've been trying to harness solar power to some extent, and we've been trying to harness wind power to some extent. And until we get those technologies around, we're still going to have these problems we have to stop and think about. So we need to conserve what we can conserve today. So when we get in a position not to have to rely on those, we'll be in pretty good shape. Corporate policy is just the stance that a corporation takes on social and political issues. Here's just some things here. Xerox offers social service leave program. 60% of companies cut their philanthropic donations during the recession, but they're more likely to give time and goods. And then 2/3 of MBA students, I don't know if this still holds true, said that they would work for a lower salary to work for a company that was socially responsible. This is just what I like to call a gee whiz slide. It tells you what these celebrities are doing to promote philanthropic endeavors. These are the world's most generous givers. And we're not going to talk too much about that. It's just there for you to see. An interesting slide, but not necessarily something that we have to be concerned about. There's life after tragedy. Japan's post-tsunami biggest givers. Of course, Japan's had some other huge issues, especially the meltdown of the nuclear plant several years ago. These are President Kennedy's basic rights for consumers. Notice what they are: rights to safety, be informed, to choose, and to be heard. Social media allows companies to reach a lot of people, diverse groups, connect with them. They're using social media to communicate social responsibility efforts. We need to make sure that when we see those efforts, that companies are actually doing what they say they're doing, and it's not just PR. This is social customer contact, things you should do and you shouldn't do for businesses. Business ought to stay away from political rants, although I can tell you that's not necessarily true. We have a number of people in this country that are associated with businesses that they may not do rants, but they certainly put out what I would consider to be propaganda. Issue that we have to be concerned about, insider trading. Now, there is nothing wrong with insider trading. If you live in the Cincinnati area, every Thursday in the business page, it will have a section of insider trading where an executive has exercised his or her option to buy a certain amount of stock and then sells that stock for a hefty profit. That is insider trading because that person has the opportunity to buy the stock at a certain option, which is lower than what you and I can buy them for, and then to sell it at the current going rate. That is insider trading. What we're talking about here is somebody using information about a company to further their own profit. That's information that would not be accessible to the general public. So there are two types of insider trading. There is this type that we have here right now, which is unethical because people are using information about a company that people don't know about, and then they buy or sell stock based upon that information. And in some cases, if it's large enough, they can influence the market to a great extent, or at least influence that stock, how that stock is being traded for that particular day. The insider trading that I talked about is perfectly legal. That is insider trading. So there's a dichotomy that you have to be very careful about to make sure that you're saying it the correct way. Unethical behavior doesn't do anybody any good. Yeah, it might line the pockets of somebody for a while, but they'll eventually be found out. Responsibility to employees, obviously create jobs, treat employees with respect. We cannot overemphasize that word, respect. And of course, along with respect goes openness and fairness and integrity. Have to do those things the right, and then offer employees salaries and benefits that allow them to live a productive life. These are the most admired companies in the United States. This again is dated. It's almost 3 years old from Fortune magazine. How true it is, I'm not too sure. Now, this is what happens when employees are upset, and this is what we get when, in some cases, not in all cases, when employees are not treated fairly. Notice what fraud costs. Costs about 5% of annual revenues and 30% of all business failures. So disgruntled workers, you know, they shift the blame to somebody else. They might make creative expenditures and expense accounts. They make commitments that they don't intend to live up to them, and doing the minimum, and then of course keeping resources so that other people can't get to them. These are just a little bit of information here. A third of our employees in the working sector receive their wages from nonprofits. We know that the green movement is taking on more and more steam these days, for lack of a better term. And companies, again, are trying to minimize their carbon footprint. I used the term environmental footprint a few minutes ago. It's the same thing. Want to do more without taking more out of the environment. We're all responsible for the environment. And the last thing it says here that green jobs are growing. We may have as many, as 40 million in the United States in about 15 or so years. This is just some information here about greenwashing, thinking green. You can find that in the textbook. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. These are worthy causes. What $1,000 can buy or $10,000 can buy. Social auditing. This is auditing that goes on for companies to see how well they're doing things, implementing socially responsible programs. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about that, but these are 5 types of social audit watchdogs. Progress assessment, international ethics, 1970s Foreign Corrupt Practices Act said that if you're an American business, you're doing business overseas, you have to abide by American laws. Ethical culture clash for you. And then finally, this is our last progress assessment, and we are now at 5:20, and so it's time for us to take a break. Please come back at 5:30, and we will move into chapter 5. Thank you. Please come back at 5:30.